Sammy took a hold of my hand and tugged me along behind her. We passed by food stalls, games and rides until we stopped in front of a red and white tent with a big sign. Vinny the Dummy. I hesitated at the entrance. Fear crept its way up my spine. Haven't told Sammy about my fear of dolls, my hesitation when I noticed by her as she entered the tent.
Come on, Gail. I think the show is starting.
I looked around at the crowded amusement park before I entered the tent. It was almost full, except for 2 open seats. We both sat down as the lights dimmed and a spotlight shone on the small stage where a microphone and stool sat. The curtain behind the stage shifted as a tall man emerged, dressed in a suit. The crowd gave the man a warm applause as he took his spot on the stool. He looked over at us before he addressed us. A full house, he stated as an assistant came out with a suitcase and placed it right next to the man. He leaned down and opened the case and pulled out the dummy that looked like a miniature version of himself and set the dummy on his right knee. The man asked the dummy, which moved its eyes around the room. Its glass eyes eyed every single one of us before it let out a crackle of joy, flapped its arms in delight. The dummy shouted. His voice dropped off into a soft giggle. The man smiled at the dummy before he turned his attention back to the audience. Took a quick glance around at the crowd and got an eerie feeling and tugged at my stomach. I leaned over to Sammy's ear and whispered that we should go. She looked at me and made a pouting face. I sighed and shoved at an easy feeling back and pretended I was enjoying the show while laughing every once in a while. The show lasted for an hour. My cheeks hurt from smiling and forcing laughs. I had a mild headache that seemed to intensify with each applause and cheer. The air around the tent had changed. I felt terrified and disgusted all the while Sammy laughed and laughed. She had her hands clutched to her sides as she wept. I touched her shoulder. She didn't react at all. She kept laughing and laughing until her face turned red. A couple of people stood up and left the tent. Everyone walked out from the tent until only Sammy and I remained. The man on stage kept on telling joke after joke, while Sammy's face went from red to purple. She grasped a snot and tears streaked down her face. Her mouth and eyes were open as she laughed. Fear gripped my core as I tried to grab my girlfriend's attention, but nothing worked. She fell to the floor, face up. She continued to laugh, but her laugh sounded more hoarse by the second. She didn't sound human by the time I lifted her off the ground. The man on stage had stopped his routine, and the spotlight shone on us. I looked back to only see Vinny the Dummy on stage. I dropped Sammy when I turned back around to find the man standing before us, a look of pure rage in his face. I picked Sammy up and placed her in her seat again, before he went back onto the stage and started his routine again, but it was different this time. He didn't tell jokes anymore. He talked about gruesome ideations and plans that made my stomach churn. He spoke Latin as he looked at me. His eyes seemed to stare right through me. I threw up when his skin seemed to tear away from his body. I watched in horror as his limbs elongated and horns seemed to grow right before my eyes. He kept speaking Latin, and then the spotlight cut out. The entire tent was drawn in darkness, yet I can still hear Sammy laughing. I walked to where she would be, but she wasn't there. The spotlight came back on, and the tent was empty. The police don't believe me. No one ever saw me with Sammy that night. Carnival employees told the police they found me unconscious in a pool of my vomit in the tent. They suspected I was under the influence of LSD or some other psychedelic. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget. Sammy's still alive, I know it. The carnival is moving 2 states away. I booked a hotel room in advance and I plan on getting Sammy back.